Okay guys, so sorry I can't be with you. We're going to start off with the do now, which has a lot of great choices here that are kind of tricky to pick apart. So we're looking as far as how are these two related. So if you want to take a guess and pause and then come back to me, I will be telling you the answer in 3, 2, 1. And choice number 1 is correct. And that is because humanism and the scientific revolution are both looking at, life here on Earth. Humanism, again, is the emphasis of the individual. The scientific revolution is looking at a change in science. So, of course, you're going to have to look to worldly topics to study in both of these arenas. Now, so when and where is the scientific revolution happening? This map shows you some of the highlighted areas where the scientific revolution occurred. And again, this is going to be part of the consequence of moving away from having your blinders on. And they're going to start to branch out and really go back to studying the classics, and they're going to realize that it's possible that there were some inaccuracies of classical learning. So the Greeks and the Muslims, who had golden ages before, even the Romans had, this golden age where they they had some learning that in turn was preserved or built upon. These people, the Greeks and the Muslims, they never ran experiments. So to find truth in something, at times you need to observe and experiment. And if you can't observe, experiment, and use that data to come up with truth, then all you really have is a theory. So what happens is, during the scientific revolution, they're going to test the theories of the classical Roman and Greeks and even the Muslims who had their golden age, and through some of these experiments they'll find that some theories were not correct, so they were able to build upon that. Also, again, the Renaissance had occurred, so this rebirth of learning opened the door to new avenues in science, and it allowed for people to say, maybe we can not only focus on moving away from religion, but maybe we could, turn our studies to science. Again, the Reformation. Excuse me, took some water there. We see a bunch of people are stepping out, and they're standing up and they're saying, hey, we're not going to conform. We are not going to just stand by and accept kind of what's always been, and instead they are going to question the the effectiveness of what everybody believed to be the best then. So you have Henry VIII, even Martin Luther, John Calvin, who's seen here saying, hey, everybody looks at this Catholic Church like it's untouchable, it's infallible, it's never wrong, and they are going to say, you know what, maybe they are, breakable, maybe they aren't always right, and they go down a different path, and they fund programs to encourage alternate thinking or alternate lifestyles, and for some it works out. Elizabeth I is going to have a golden age for England, and it's because of the funding of literature and art, rather than throwing your money away completely to the church, that is going to lead her country to greatness. Now, what kings and queens are also funding is exploration. And this scene here is Christopher Columbus landing in Hispaniola. And, so the age of exploration, which is our fourth cause, it's also going to show a perfect scenario of a theory that had always been, and it was wrong. For centuries, people believed that, you know, if you sail west, you'll eventually end up in Asia if you start out in Europe. And the fact of the matter was that it wasn't true. And although this guy participated in a genocide that killed millions, he is celebrated year after year for his findings of the Americas. And as we ourselves question our traditional learning, we find more and more that this man, Christopher Columbus, is just not the greatest guy, and that it's possible Christopher Columbus was not the first to find the Americas. However, we need to teach it this way for now, so here I am teaching that Columbus was the first to reach the Americas and prove that the theories of classical times aren't always true. So again, they're challenging all accepted knowledge, and they test and they experiment, and then, or they observe and they prove whether they are true or false. And the ones that are true, of course, they build upon, and they have revelations in other areas. So now, who are these famous people that dive into science? One man who we're going to name first is Copernicus. He's got a dashing hairdo there, solid hairstyle, pretty poofy with those curls. Anyway, he is going to come up with a theory himself that is going to be way, way accurate, but it's also totally not cool, because his theory is going to go against the church. So the church's theory was the geocentric model, that the Earth is actually the center of our galaxy, when in fact it's not. It's the sun. And Copernicus is like, yo, dudes, the Earth is not the center. It just doesn't make any sense. And he came up with the idea that it's actually a heliocentric model, where the sun is at the center of the Earth. And later on, Galileo is going to prove his theory correct with the invention of the telescope. Before the telescope was invented, though, Copernicus came up with this theory, and the church was all like, yo, you better take that back. And Copernicus is like, no. And the church was like, yeah, well, we're going to excommunicate you, and maybe we'll burn you at the stake. And Copernicus is like, wow, you know what? I don't know what I was talking about. The heliocentric model thing? Totally not it. And Copernicus's book actually went onto the index, that list that I mentioned to you during the Reformation, that the Catholic Church made up of all those books that you weren't able to read. You know. Okay, this beautiful depiction of the human body is pretty accurate if you were to take someone's dead or, body cadaver and hang it up in public. So there was a man by the name of Vesalius who would dissect corpses, usually criminals' corpses that he would dig up from the cemetery. And he would take their skin off, and he would publicly show people what was, under the skin. Just think about that. Pretty sick. I would probably pass out within seconds. However, that creepy stare of Vesalius lends itself to us believing that he could totally do this without even thinking twice. Anywho, since we were young, we're never really kept in the dark about what's under our skin. We know that there's veins, we know there's a heart, we know that there's certain organs, and that they all work together to keep us alive. And Vesalius would prove a lot of cool theories, like what pumps blood through our body, and it's actually the heart. He was able to help prove this theory because he was able to write a whole book on anatomy, because he dissected all of these lovely corpses. Now again, if I'm going too fast or too, like, boring for you, you could pause me if I'm going too fast and write all the notes down and then listen to me. Or, if I'm too boring for you, you could just mute me and then write the stuff down and then read it on your own time to get the explanation. Alright, here's Francis Bacon. He comes up with a scientific method, step-by-step process for you to get all of your truth and your conclusions. And I'm sure you love this guy because this is what you do in biology or whatever when you do your labs. Harvey helps to also figure out that the heart is a pump, talks about how blood circulates. Galileo, one of the most important guys here, he helps to find that the Earth and planets revolve around the sun. So he's the father of modern experimental science. So he helped Copernicus with his theory. The problem for Galileo is he's deemed as a heretic because he went against the Catholic Church. Catholic Church threatens him. He's asked to recant. He goes out in public and he does recant, but in like a little bit of a sarcastic way. But lucky for him, they do not burn him at the stake. They just put him under house arrest. You have Descartes, who will also participate in a time called the Enlightenment, which we'll talk about next year if you make it there. Newton with the laws of gravity. These are some of the major inventions that come up during the scientific revolution. But this is probably the best or the most important slide of this whole thing. And a lot of you might think that this is obvious stuff. This is common sense stuff. But truly, until you try something, you don't really know what it looks like or how it works. So before this, the Catholic Church deemed the body as this sacred entity that if you mess with it or desecrate it to any degree, it's like an immoral thing. It's something that's wrong. So when these scientists were opening up dead bodies, the church was they were raging, and technically the scientists were committing a crime because they were going against a belief in the Catholic Church. And the punishment for heresy was being burned at the stake or being executed. And of course, sometimes you can get away with it and get house arrest. But having this hung over your head prevented a lot of people from actually possibly discovering even more during this time. The other issue is that all of this questioning of science and religion will eventually pour into another category that people are going to question, which is the government. So as all these absolute monarchs are rising to power and doing whatever they feel or want, they will eventually come face to face with this questioning spirit as well. And the people will ask for things that they want in their civil liberties, and they will attain those by revolting. First in places like England, and then eventually France and America. And with that, we're done. So enjoy the rest of your day.